I arrived from the bakery and found the hallway of my house blocked by 4 towers of corrugated cardboard. My granddaughter looked at me from the sofa with her phone in one hand and a tape measure in the other, and blurted out that she had already paid for my nursing home, that I should pack quickly because she needed this space for her design studio. I am Teresa. I am 72 years old, and I worked 4 decades classifying documents, deeds, and wills in the municipal archive of this city. She thought my house was a blank paper she could rewrite at her whim, but she forgot that archivists never let go of a record without first reviewing the fine print in detail. The morning had started with the usual precision, a routine I myself had cataloged and perfected over the years. It was Tuesday, the day the flour truck arrives at Elias's bakery on the corner of Maple Avenue. I left my house at exactly 8 o'clock, my gray wool coat buttoned up to the neck, to protect me from the freezing breeze that always sweeps down the main avenue this time of year. Walking through my neighborhood is like flipping through a catalog of files I know by heart. I know exactly which neighbor expanded their kitchen without the proper building permit in 1998. I know who illegally subdivided their lot in the early 2000s, and I know who the real owners of the commercial corners are. For 40 years, my hands organized the folios, stamped the resolutions, and filed the lives of all these people on the metal shelves of the municipality. The walk to the bakery took me 10 minutes. My knees don't have the fluidity they used to, but the slow pace allows me to observe. I waved to Martha, who was sweeping the sidewalk in front of her house with the green iron gates, the same house whose mortgage I saw cleared in the records of '95. I waved to Charlie, the retired mechanic, who was tuning the engine of an old sedan with the same patience I used to restore birth certificates corroded by humidity. I bought my 3 sourdough rolls, paid with the exact coins I kept separated in the right pocket of my coat, and started the walk back. The smell of warm yeast accompanied me, a small constant in a world that sometimes seems to fall apart. It was upon turning the corner of my own block that I noticed the first anomaly in the usual landscape. A white van, the kind you rent by the hour for quick-moving jobs, was parked with 2 wheels on the curb, right in front of my wrought iron gate. The license plate was out of state. The gate, which I always locked with a double turn of the key, was wide open, knocking slightly against the brick wall every time the wind blew. I didn't feel panic. Panic is a messy emotion, typical of those who don't know where to look for information. My mind operated as it always has, registering data, cataloging irregularities, preparing the ground for damage assessment. I walked up the 3 steps of the porch and crossed the threshold of my front door, which was also open. The first thing that assaulted me wasn't an image, but a smell, the industrial scent of new cardboard, packing tape glue, and bubble wrap. It was an invasive smell that immediately erased the aroma of floor wax and roasted coffee that has always characterized my home. Then my eyes adjusted to the light in the hallway. There were boxes, dozens of them. They were stacked with no sense of structural balance, interrupting the natural flow from the entrance to the living room. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my bag of warm bread against my chest. I looked at the labels written with a thick black marker, in that rushed, rounded handwriting young people use for everything today. Linen fabrics. Read one massive box, blocking access to the oak umbrella stand. Winter catalogs. Read another, stacked dangerously on top of a smaller box that looked ready to cave in. Color swatches. Do not crush, indicated a third. The hallway my late husband, Thomas, and I had walked down every day of our lives together had been reduced to a narrow aisle of a wholesale warehouse. I moved forward carefully, sliding my body between the cardboard towers, feeling the friction of the material against the wool of my coat. The house was unusually cold. Someone had thrown the living room windows wide open. I reached the edge of the main room and stopped in the doorway. My granddaughter, Vanessa, was standing in the center of the room. She was wearing dark fabric pants and a designer sweater that looked intentionally worn out. She was 24 years old, the exact age I was when I signed my first employment contract at the archive, put the down payment on this very house, and was expecting my first and only son, Robert. Vanessa, on the other hand, was holding a laser distance meter, aiming a small red dot at the back wall, just above where my crystal display cabinet rested. Next to her, sitting on my floral tapestry sofa, was a young guy dressed entirely in black, holding a digital tablet. The kid was typing frantically without looking up. 11 feet wide, Vanessa dictated, still not noticing my presence. If we knock down this drywall, we can integrate the light from the kitchen. The back window gives us northern light, perfect for photographing the fabrics. What about the old furniture? The kid asked, pointing vaguely with his digital stylus toward my cabinet, my armchairs, and the coffee table Thomas had hand-carved. That all goes first thing tomorrow morning, she replied, putting the meter in her pocket. I already ordered a dumpster for the rubble and the trash, and whatever is usable can be taken by the donation truck. I don't want any of this dust here. I took a step forward, intentionally making the wooden floorboards creak beneath my shoe. The sound cut through the air in the room. Vanessa spun around immediately, surprised, but her expression quickly shifted into a rehearsed smile, devoid of any real warmth. "Grandma," she exclaimed, walking toward me with open arms, though she stopped 3 feet away, as if she feared the bakery smell would seep into her designer clothes. "I'm so glad you're here. You left early and I couldn't surprise you." I didn't return her greeting. My eyes traveled methodically from her face to the boxes in the hallway, then to the kid on the sofa, and finally back to her. I maintained an absolutely neutral expression. In the archive, I learned that silence is the most powerful extraction tool that exists. People, unable to stand the void, end up saying much more than they planned to. "What is all this, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice low and level, without a hint of a tremor. She let out an exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes at the kid on the sofa before looking back at me with an expression of manufactured patience, the same kind you'd use with a toddler who doesn't understand a simple instruction. She reached into her leather bag, pulled out a glossy brochure printed on heavyweight coated paper, and handed it to me. I took it by the edge. The cover showed a group of silver-haired seniors dressed in immaculate sportswear, laughing exaggeratedly around a chessboard in a perfectly manicured garden. The title, in gold lettering, read, "Sunset Manor. Your well-being is our priority. The first 6 months are paid in full." It's a top-tier place. They have 24-hour nurses, gentle yoga classes, personalized menus. You need to pack quickly because I need this space right here. The contractor is coming on Thursday to tear down the walls, and I can't have your things getting in the way. I opened the brochure, reading the subtitles. Luxury shared rooms, constant medical supervision, flexible visiting hours. My mind, trained to look for discrepancies in documents, latched onto the key words. "We paid," I repeated, pausing on the conjugation of the verb, plural. "My dad and I." "Obviously," she replied, walking over to the window and slamming it shut. "My dad is in complete agreement. He knows this house is too big for you alone. The front stairs are a constant hazard. Besides, he signed the power of attorney last week. He handed the management of the assets over to me to speed up the whole process. It's for your well-being, Grandma. You need supervision, and I need a downtown studio to launch my clothing brand. It's a win-win." The kid on the sofa shifted uncomfortably, lowering the tablet, clearly feeling the geometric tension that was building in the room. "My well-being," I said, pronouncing every syllable carefully, tasting the irony of the word. "Exactly," Vanessa insisted, stepping closer to me and trying to place a hand on my shoulder, which I dodged by taking an imperceptible step back. "You can't live alone here forever. You forget things. Last month you left the garden hose running all afternoon. This house requires maintenance you just can't give it anymore. And honestly, the land value of this lot is wasted on a leaky roof. My dad signed. It's all legalized, so please go to your room and start sorting your clothes. You can only take 2 suitcases to the manor." I just stared at her. I didn't shed a single tear. Crying clouds the vision, and I needed to see the full picture with absolute clarity. Robert, my son, the boy whose scraped knees I bandaged, the man I lent money to for his 3 failed businesses, the coward who didn't have the guts to look me in the eye and tell me he wanted to throw me away, had signed a piece of paper, a signature traced in ink on a notarized document, handing his arrogant daughter control over what he assumed was his early inheritance. While Vanessa talked to me about supervision and well-being, my archivist mind opened the drawer of operational memories. I saw the countless afternoons at this very coffee table, teaching this exact same little girl how to cut out cardboard vowels because her parents were too busy fighting in their apartment. I saw the medical records I meticulously filed myself when she had pneumonia at age 8, the sleepless nights wiping a cold cloth across her forehead. I saw the college tuition receipts that Thomas and I quietly paid so she could study design, because Robert's salary never stretched far enough. All that invisible work, all that structural care that held this family up for decades, had been classified by her as irrelevant. I was being treated like an obsolete document, taking up too much space on the main shelf, needing to be sent to the underground storage to make room for new acquisitions. But Vanessa, in her rush to claim the space, had made a monumental miscalculation. She had assumed that the silence with which I managed my life was synonymous with ignorance. She had confused the quietness of widowhood with the passivity of dementia. "The moving truck," I said, my voice sounding as flat and professional as if I were working the counter at the civil registry. "What exact time does it arrive tomorrow?" Vanessa smiled, clearly relieved to meet no resistance, assuming my practical question was a sign of unconditional surrender. 9 o'clock sharp in the morning, she said, checking the screen of her latest generation phone. "The moving guys will come to pack up the big furniture. At that exact same time, the transport from Sunset Manor arrives to pick you up. I highly recommend you leave your suitcases packed by the front door tonight, so you don't hold them up." "Understood," was the only thing I replied. I walked toward the dining room, navigating around another tower of boxes holding spools of thread and sewing patterns. I placed the paper bag with the 3 sourdough rolls exactly in the center of the wooden table, aligning it with the edge of the crocheted placemat. Every movement of mine was deliberate. Then I turned around and walked back down the hallway, without looking at Vanessa or her silent assistant. "Where are you going?" she asked, her tone slightly annoyed, as if my deviation from the script she had written in her head was a sign of disrespect. "You have to go to your room to pack." I didn't stop. I didn't give her the privilege of an answer. I opened the front door, crossed the threshold onto the porch, and closed the door behind me, making sure the deadbolt made that solid, definitive metallic click. The mid-morning sun hit my face, warming my cold skin. The neighborhood carried on. Martha had finished sweeping and was now watering the geraniums in her clay pots, but her eyes were fixed on the white van and my front door. Charlie had slid out from under the sedan and was wiping his grease-covered hands with a dark rag, looking toward my property with a deep frown. The neighbors on Maple Avenue aren't just simple spectators. They are a closed ecosystem, a network of eyewitnesses who have been keeping a mental log of every event that has happened on these sidewalks for 40 years. They knew who I was. They knew what this house represented. I walked to the edge of the porch. I rested a hand on the wrought iron railing, which I had sanded and repainted myself last spring, and opened my black leather purse. I pushed aside my coin purse, my reading glasses, and my blood pressure pill case. My fingers searched for and found the familiar texture of worn synthetic leather. I pulled out my green notebook. It was a small hardcover book, its edges frayed from 4 decades of use. To any casual observer, it was just an old lady's address book. To me, it was the master index. Written inside were the direct numbers of municipal inspectors, construction chiefs, public notaries, and deputy archivists. People I had shared coffee with, people I had helped find lost files in the basement of City Hall. People who knew that when Teresa asked for a favor, it wasn't a favor, it was the collection of an institutional debt. I opened the notebook to the letter S. I ran my index finger down the lines written in blue ink until it stopped on a name underlined twice. Arthur Sterling, former director of the real estate registry, my old boss, and above all, the attorney who personally drafted the documents for this property in 1985 under my specific instructions. I took out my cell phone, a device with large buttons that Robert had given me for my last birthday, complaining about how hard it was to get a hold of me. I dialed the 10 digits with methodical slowness, making sure not to make a single typing error. I brought the receiver to my ear. The phone rang. 1, 2, 3 times. Hello. Sterling's deep, gravelly voice sounded on the other end of the line, with the unmistakable background noise of a morning news broadcast. Arthur, good morning. It's Teresa, I said, my voice firm, without changing the volume, knowing that Martha across the street had turned off her hose to hear better. Teresa, what a miracle. To what do I owe the honor on a Tuesday morning? Do you need us to dig up some old paper in the archives to entertain ourselves? He joked with the familiarity of old colleagues. No, Arthur, it's not an old paper, I replied, staring intently at the white van parked on my curb, casting a shadow over my rose bushes. I need you to come to my house tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning, sharp. Bring your briefcase, and bring the certified copy of the life estate clause and conditional ownership deed we drafted before Thomas passed away. There was silence on the other end of the line. Sterling's tone changed instantly, losing any trace of humor, replaced by the professional sharpness of a man who recognizes a structural crisis. Robert tried to make a move? He asked, lowering his voice. Robert signed a broad power of attorney over to his daughter, I explained, distilling the facts down to their purest essence. Vanessa is in my living room right now. She filled my hallway with boxes. She just informed me that they paid for 6 months at a nursing home, and that tomorrow at 9 a.m., moving truck is arriving to empty the house and demolish the walls. She says she needs the space for a design studio, and that it's for my well-being. I heard Sterling exhale heavily through his nose. A broad power of attorney over an asset he doesn't hold absolute title to, Sterling muttered almost to himself, with that tone of forensic fascination we used when we discovered real estate fraud in the files. What audacious ignorance. He assumed Thomas's succession gave him complete dominion. They didn't check the encumbrance registry at the county office, did they? Young people today don't read the fine print, Arthur. They think the world begins the day they decide to download an app, I said, feeling the cold breeze hit my face without flinching. They think they can pack up 40 years of a life and ship it to a storage unit just because paper tolerates a signature. What do you want to do, Teresa? Sterling asked. The question wasn't out of doubt. It was a request for operational instructions. He knew my temperament. He knew I wasn't calling to cry or seek comfort. I was calling to activate a protocol. I want the network present, I said, looking down the street. I'll speak with Charlie, with Martha, and with Elias today. I want witnesses. I want the entire neighborhood to see exactly how arrogance crumbles when it collides with the weight of the law. And I want you here at 8:30, with the documents in hand, half an hour before her truck arrives. I'll be there at 8:30, Teresa, with stamps, signatures, and the civil code under my arm. Let her pack. Let her dream of her big windows and her studio. The fall hurts more when they think they've already reached the top. Thank you, Arthur. I'll see you tomorrow. I ended the call. I put the phone back in my purse, followed by the green notebook, and snapped the metal clasp shut with a dry click. I stood on the porch for a few more minutes, observing the street. My street. Behind the wooden door at my back, I could hear the dull thud of boxes being dragged across the parquet floor. Vanessa's voice barking orders at the kid, planning the systematic destruction of my home. She was measuring the walls, calculating the light, distributing the space in her mind, convinced her victory was a done deal. Convinced I was just a fragile old woman who needed supervision. I adjusted the collar of my coat and walked down the steps toward the sidewalk. I had less than 24 hours before the truck arrived, and there were several visits I needed to make in the neighborhood. The machinery was in motion, and when the moving truck pulled up the next morning, Vanessa would discover, in the most humiliating way possible, that in this house, and in this life, I am still the only one who controls the archive. I crossed the street with a firm step, heading straight toward where Charlie was still wiping his hands with the rag. It was time to organize my own moving of pieces on the board, and the first piece was making sure that tomorrow at 9 in the morning, Maple Avenue had the best possible view of the show. When the truck arrived, boxes wouldn't be the only things going out that door. But Vanessa didn't know that yet. And silence until tomorrow would be my best ally. I crossed the street with a firm step, feeling the uneven asphalt beneath the soles of my walking shoes. The morning sun was starting to heat the hoods of the parked cars, but I felt a cold, metallic clarity in my chest. There was no room for sadness. Sadness is a misfiled document that only gets in the way when you need to find the truth. Charlie was still standing in front of his makeshift sidewalk shop, running the dark rag over his weathered hands, his eyes glued to the white van desecrating the entrance to my house. "Charlie," I called out, stopping 3 feet from his toolbox. The smell of motor oil and hot metal was strangely comforting, an unalterable constant on Maple Avenue. He looked up, squinting beneath the brim of his worn-out cap. His face, marked by decades of sun and hard work, reflected genuine concern. "Miss Teresa," he replied, lowering the rag. "I've been watching those outsiders for half an hour. That kid in black came out a while ago to smoke a cigarette and flicked the butt into your rose bushes. I was about to walk over and give him a piece of my mind, but I saw you coming back from the bakery. What's going on? Are those crates they're dragging in for the roof repairs you were going to do?" I shook my head, keeping my posture straight. "In the archive, when a file was corrupted, you didn't beat around the bush. You presented the damage exactly as it was. They aren't repairs, Charlie. It's my granddaughter, Vanessa. She brought boxes to empty my house. She just informed me that my son Robert signed a power of attorney over the property and that they've paid for my first 6 months in a nursing home. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning, a moving truck is coming to take my furniture, and me with it. She says she needs the space for a design studio." Charlie dropped the rag on the ground. The impact of the news blurred his features for a second, before indignation hardened his jaw. He knew Thomas. He had been at my husband's funeral. A nursing home. Robert signed a paper to kick you out of your own house. Charlie's voice rose in pitch, raspy and loaded with a rage I refused to outwardly show myself. "What absolute nerve! That house is yours, Miss Teresa. You and Mr. Thomas built it brick by brick. I helped you install that porch railing myself, back in '82. How is some spoiled little girl going to come and pack you into boxes like you're some old piece of junk?" At that moment, the sound of shuffling footsteps interrupted us. Martha, who had been watering her geraniums, crossed the street, leaning heavily on her aluminum cane. Her checkered apron was damp at the edges, and her eyes, small and sharp behind thick glasses, gleamed with that protective curiosity only lifelong neighbors possess. "I heard everything, Teresa," Martha said, stopping next to Charlie, breathing a little heavily. "I didn't mean to pry, but my right ear still works perfectly. Tell me this is a sick joke. Tell me Robert didn't dare do something so barbaric." "It's no joke, Martha," I replied, looking her in the eye. "Vanessa is inside right now, measuring my walls to tear them down. She thinks that because she has a piece of paper signed by her father, my entire life belongs to her. She thinks I'm a senile old woman who can't tell a contract from a napkin." Martha slammed the tip of her cane against the asphalt, producing a sharp crack. "That Robert was always a coward. Even as a kid, when he broke a window, he'd hide behind your skirts so Thomas wouldn't scold him. And now he hides behind his daughter. What a disgrace. What are you going to do, Teresa? If you want, I'll call my boys. In 10 minutes we'll clear your house of those people and throw their boxes out onto the street." I offered a very faint smile, barely a line on my lips. I appreciated the loyalty, but brute force is the recourse of those who lack documentation. "We don't need violence, Martha. We need witnesses," I said, lowering my voice so my words became a private pact among the 3 of us. "I just spoke with Arthur Sterling. Tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning, he will be at my door with the original property deeds. Vanessa has made a catastrophic legal error, but I'm not going to tell her that right now. I want the truck to arrive. I want her to feel like she owns the world." Charlie crossed his arms, a spark of comprehension lighting up his wrinkled face. He remembered very well when, back in '92, the city tried to shut down his shop over a zoning error. It was me who went down to the subterranean archive, dug up the original 1970 blueprint, and found the grandfather clause that saved his livelihood. Charlie knew that when I talked about papers, I was talking about guaranteed victories. "I understand," the mechanic muttered, nodding slowly. You want the girl to crash into the brick wall at top speed. I want her to learn that respect isn't demanded by yelling, it's imposed by proving who holds the keys, I corrected him. But I need your help. The moving truck arrives at 9. If they park right in front of my door, they'll load everything quickly, and the scandal will stay contained inside the house. Charlie, do you still have that old tow truck, the one you used to haul scrap metal? I've got it in the backyard, Miss Teresa. Runs perfectly. Tomorrow at 8:45, I need your tow truck to suffer a mechanical failure exactly on the corner of my curb, coincidentally, so that the moving truck can't square up in front of my door and has to get stuck diagonally in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. I want every single person walking down Maple Avenue to have to stop and look. Charlie let out a gravelly laugh, showing his tobacco-stained teeth. Consider it done. That tow truck is going to die right at the perfect angle. Nobody is going to be able to move that moving truck without half the neighborhood finding out. I turned to Martha. And you, Martha, you run the Neighborhood Watch text group, the Eyes on the Street one. Yes, she replied, straightening her back with pride. I've got 42 neighbors in there, from Mrs. Rose at the bakery to the school principal. Tomorrow at 8:30, send a message. Tell them there's a legal dispute at my house and I need the neighborhood's support. Tell them to come out to their porches, to look out their windows. I want an audience. Vanessa thinks she can make me invisible. I want the whole neighborhood to see her tomorrow. Don't you worry, Teresa, Martha said, resting a warm hand on my arm. At 9 in the morning, this street is going to look like a 4th of July parade. That insolent little girl doesn't know who she messed with. We aren't pieces of furniture you can just throw away. I thanked them both with a nod and turned around. The first phase of the cataloging was complete. The stage was set, but an archivist's mind never rests with just one source of information. It always seeks data corroboration. Instead of returning to my house, where Vanessa was still dictating measurements, I walked back toward the corner, in the direction of Elias's bakery. The walk was quick. As I walked in, the bell above the door announced my presence. The shop was empty at that hour, and Elias, a sturdy man with a white mustache, was arranging trays of meringues in the glass display case. Teresa, he exclaimed, surprised to see me for the second time that morning. Did you forget something? Were the sourdough rolls too tough? The rolls are perfect, Elias. I came to ask you a question, I said, resting both hands on the cold Formica counter. Yesterday afternoon, while I was at the clinic for my blood pressure checkup, did someone come in asking questions about my house? Elias frowned, wiping his hands on his spotless apron. His expression turned serious, as if he suddenly connected a series of disjointed data points. Well, now that you mention it, yes. Yesterday past 4 o'clock, a very dressed-up young woman came in, wearing an expensive coat and dark sunglasses she didn't even take off to speak to me. She asked for imported mineral water, which I obviously don't sell. And what did she ask you? I inquired, keeping my voice neutral. She asked me about the neighborhood's security, said she was evaluating investing in a commercial retail space on this block, but she was worried about the demographic profile. That's how she said it. Demographic profile. She asked if a lot of police patrols came through here and if the neighbors were very problematic. I told her this is a neighborhood of older folks, retirees, that nothing ever happens here. And she made a face like she was disgusted and muttered something about how she'd have to change the facade of the whole sector to attract her clientele. Then she stood in front of the bakery window and stared at your house, Teresa, for a good while. She was typing things into her phone. I nodded slowly. Vanessa's arrogance wasn't a spontaneous outburst this morning. It was a calculated project. She had come to appraise the territory while I was out, evaluating the environment as if she were already the absolute owner of the square footage. That girl is my granddaughter, Elias, I said bluntly. Tomorrow at 9, she's bringing a truck to empty my house and send me to a nursing home. Elias's eyes went wide, and a flush of indignation crept up his thick neck. What? But you're sharper than I am. How dare she? I'll go over there myself and chase her out with a broom. That won't be necessary, Elias. I just ask one thing of you. Tomorrow before 9, prepare 2 large thermoses of your best coffee and bring them out to the sidewalk in front of my house. Arthur Sterling will be there, and several neighbors too. It's going to be a long morning, and we'll need something hot while we watch a cardboard empire crumble." The baker nodded firmly, slapping the counter with the palm of his hand. "I'll be there, Teresa, with coffee, cups, and even some pastries. Nobody touches our own." I walked out of the bakery feeling that my defense structure was now impenetrable. The community wasn't an abstract concept, it was a network of people who had shared joys, mourning, and routines for 40 years. Vanessa believed power resided in a piece of paper signed by an absent son, but she was ignorant to the fact that true power resides in the collective memory of a place. I returned to my house. The quick freight van was no longer parked on the curb. I assumed the assistant in black had left to get more boxes or to coordinate the dumpster. I walked up the porch steps and went inside. The interior of my home seemed to have aged 10 years in the 2 hours I was gone. The boxes in the hallway had multiplied. The smell of cardboard and packing tape was suffocating. I walked toward the living room, but it was empty. I heard noises coming from the back of the hallway, my bedroom. My heart gave a dull thump against my ribs, but my face didn't change its expression. I walked with silent steps over the parquet floor until I reached the doorframe of my bedroom. There was Vanessa. She had opened the doors of my oak wardrobe. My clothes, my dresses organized by season, my winter coats, everything had been shoved aside. In the center of my bed, on top of the hand-knit quilt my mother gave me when I got married, were 3 black heavy-duty trash bags, the kind used for yard waste. Vanessa was holding a cedar wood box in her hands. It was Thomas's cigar box. Inside, I didn't keep tobacco, but the letters we wrote to each other while we were dating, Robert's first ultrasounds, and my municipal service medals. My granddaughter opened the box without the slightest hesitation. She looked at the yellowed papers with an expression of absolute boredom. "This is just trash," she muttered to herself, making the motion to dump the contents of the cedar box into one of the black bags. "That document is not classified for disposal," I said. My voice cut through the silence of the bedroom like a guillotine blade. Vanessa jumped, letting out a small shriek of surprise. The cedar box slipped from her hands, but I managed to take 2 quick steps and catch it midair before it hit the floor. A conditioned reflex from years of preventing historical records from getting ruined. I held the box against my chest and looked her in the eye. The coldness of my gaze must have scared her because she took a step back, bumping into the edge of the bed. "Grandma, you scared me," she said, putting a hand to her chest, trying to quickly recover her posture of superiority. "You shouldn't walk around like that without making a sound. You could fall." "What are you doing in my bedroom, Vanessa?" I asked, ignoring her fake tone of concern. "I'm helping you, obviously," she replied, pointing at the black bags. "Since you left without saying anything, I assumed you were overwhelmed. Elderly people often freeze up when faced with moving. It's normal." So I started separating what goes to donation and what goes to the trash. At the Sunset Manor, you can't bring these antiques. There's no room. They have a minimalism policy to prevent accidents. I pressed the cedar box tighter against me. "I didn't give you permission to touch my personal files." Vanessa rolled her eyes and let out a dry, exasperated laugh. "Grandma, please. They aren't files. They're old papers gathering dust mites. You have to learn to let go of the past. My dad warned me you'd get stubborn, that you'd cling to material things, but understand that this isn't yours anymore. My dad is the legal owner, and he authorized me to clean out the property. I'm doing you a favor. If it were up to the contractors, they'd throw all this out on the street tomorrow. I left 3 suitcases in the bathroom for you. You have until dinner time to pick out your clothes. Tomorrow at 9, there's no turning back." She crossed her arms, waiting for me to explode, expecting tears, begging, or a fit of rage she could record on her phone to prove to the nursing home doctors how unstable I was. But I am a woman of the archives, and archives don't yell, they document. "Understood," I said with glacial calm. I turned around, taking the cedar box with me, and walked out of the room without adding a single word. I heard Vanessa huff behind my back, frustrated by my lack of theatrics. I heard her say something about stubborn old people, followed by the sound of her designer footsteps walking away toward the kitchen. Her phone rang. "Hello?" Yes, Marcus, tell me. I heard her talking from the hallway, her voice instantly shifting to a professional, fawning tone. Yes, I'm already at the property. No, the clearing out is happening first thing tomorrow. By Friday, you'll have the living room empty for your crew to come in. Yes, the internal demolition permits are already paid for. I walked into the dining room. Vanessa had left her leather bag open on the table next to my bag of bread. Next to her purse was a clear plastic folder with several printed documents. Vanessa was still in the kitchen, talking loudly, arguing about epoxy paint tones for the floor. I stepped closer to the table. My eyes, trained for 40 years to scan legal text at high speed, locked onto the first page of the document inside the clear folder. The title was in bold: Investment Contract and Commercial Partnership Agreement. I didn't need to touch the paper to read the first paragraph. The contract established a partnership between Vanessa and a group called Vance Investments. The investor was providing $50,000 in capital for machinery and inventory for Vanessa's clothing brand. In exchange, Vanessa provided the property located on Maple Avenue as the headquarters and collateral for the business. But it was the penalty clause in the third paragraph that made my breath catch for a fraction of a second. In the event that the receiving party, Vanessa, fails to deliver physical and unencumbered possession of the aforementioned property before Friday of the current week to commence construction, the contract will be nullified, and the receiving party must return the capital in full, plus a penalty for damages equivalent to 100% of the contributed amount. Vanessa wasn't just being arrogant, she was desperate. She had signed a brutal financial contract using a house that didn't belong to her as collateral, assuming my son Robert held absolute title simply by being my husband's natural heir. She had gambled her future, her brand, and an amount of money she could never repay, based on the absolute certainty that I would surrender without a fight, that I was just a mute obstacle that could be boxed up and sent to a home. Now I understood the rush. I understood the quick freight, the nursing home paid in advance, the pressure to empty the house tomorrow. If I didn't leave this house tomorrow, Vanessa would default on her contract with Vance Investments. Her financial ruin would be absolute and irreversible. I memorized the investor's name and the figure. I took a step back just as Vanessa's heels clicked, returning from the kitchen. "I'm telling you we start Friday, Marcus, don't worry," she said, ending the call. "Grandma, I have to go meet with the lighting suppliers. I'll be back tomorrow at 8:30 sharp to supervise the moving guys and make sure you get on the nursing home transport with your things. Please, don't complicate my life. Pack your bags." She grabbed her purse and the clear folder without realizing I had just read her financial death sentence. She headed for the front door. "See you tomorrow, Vanessa," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any human emotion. She paused for a second, as if my tone had sent a subconscious shiver down her spine, but her arrogance was stronger. She opened the door and walked out without saying goodbye, slamming it shut hard enough to rattle the glass in the large window. Silence fell over the house all at once, heavy and dusty. I stood alone in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by the towers of cardboard boxes bearing the name of her stupid clothing brand. The afternoon light began to filter through the windows, casting long shadows across the parquet floor. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on the stove. While the water boiled, I walked down the short hallway that connected to the bathroom. There, on the wall, behind a landscape painting Thomas bought on our honeymoon, was a small built-in safe. I opened it with the combination Robert never bothered to learn, the date I started working at the municipal archive. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside was the original deed to the house, and attached with a rusty paperclip was the addendum Arthur Sterling had drafted 15 years ago. The life estate clause, the legally recorded and stamped document from the real estate registry that established that even though Robert inherited the bare legal title upon Thomas's death, I retained the absolute use, enjoyment, and dominion of the house until the day I died. Robert couldn't sell it, couldn't rent it, and, of course, couldn't hand the management over to his daughter to turn it into a design studio. The power of attorney Robert had signed wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. I took the envelope and set it on the dining room table, right next to my bag of sourdough rolls. I made my tea. I sat in the only chair that wasn't blocked by boxes. I drank the hot liquid in small sips, feeling the warmth comfort my chest. I looked at the wall clock. It was 6 in the evening. Vanessa thought time was playing in her favor. She thought the night would be my torture, the moment I would break down packing up my memories. But she understood nothing about the timing of archives. Documents wait in the dark for decades, silent, gathering dust until someone brings them into the light. And when they come out, they have the power to destroy lives, nullify contracts, and erase entire futures with a single stroke of a pen. Tomorrow at 9, Vanessa would discover that the old woman she tried to throw away wouldn't just refuse to leave the house. Tomorrow she would discover that, through her own ignorance, she had just dug a $100,000 grave that no one, not her coward of a father, nor her arrogant attitude, could rescue her from. The water in the kettle was still hot. The neighbor network was ready. The documents were on the table. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the moving truck to start its engine. I washed my teacup with the deliberate slowness of someone who knows that time, far from being an enemy, is the best torture device for the impatient. The water ran over the white porcelain, washing the remnants of chamomile leaves down the stainless steel drain. I turned off the faucet, dried the cup with a clean cotton cloth, placed it on the top shelf of the cupboard, and stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening to the unnatural silence of my own house. The walls seemed to shrink, suffocated by the dozens of cardboard boxes Vanessa had ordered stacked in the hallways. The smell of industrial glue and packing dust had seeped into the curtains, the cushions, the wood of the baseboards. I walked out to the central corridor, stopping in front of a tower of boxes blocking access to the guest bathroom. Color swatches, do not crush. I read the label written in black marker again. My hand brushed the corrugated surface of the box. The rough texture of the cardboard acted as a trigger in my memory, opening a file drawer I had kept locked for over 2 decades. It was a winter Tuesday in 1998. Robert, my son, was sitting on the exact same sofa where Vanessa's assistant had sat today. He was 32 years old at the time. His hair was a mess, and his hands shook from too much coffee and lack of sleep. His second business, a video rental store downtown, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Thomas and I were standing in front of him. Robert was crying, big tears of self-pity sliding down his unshaven cheeks, begging us to mortgage this very house to inject capital into his failing company. "It's just a signature, Dad," Robert had said, clasping his hands together in a pleading gesture that turned my stomach. "The bank will give us the check tomorrow. In 6 months, I'll make it all back and pay off the mortgage for you. This house is just a pile of old bricks. I'm your son. Are you going to let me go bankrupt to protect some bricks?" I showed him the receipts for the debts we had quietly covered. When I finished reading them, Robert stood up, kicked the coffee table his father had hand-carved, and screamed at us that we were selfish old people who preferred hugging our walls over our own blood. He stormed out, slamming the door exactly the same way his daughter would 26 years later. That was the day I cataloged my son. I understood, with the coldness of an archivist classifying a damaged document, that for Robert, family love was a financial transaction. We weren't his parents, we were his emergency fund, his venture capital, his insurance against failure. And this house was never his home. It was just a bearer check he was waiting to cash. I pulled my hand away from the cardboard box. The echo of that slammed door in 1998 faded in the hallway, but the lesson remained intact. The sharp, shrill ring of the landline cut through the heavy air in the living room. I startled for a fraction of a second, but my breathing stabilized immediately. The device, an old cream-colored plastic model, mounted on the kitchen wall, kept ringing 1, 2, 3 times. I walked over to it with a firm step, picked up the receiver, and brought it to my ear without saying a single word. I waited. In the archive, the one who speaks first is the one who reveals their need. "Mom," Robert's voice sounded on the other end of the line, distorted by static and loaded with nervous urgency. "Mom, it's me. Can you hear me?" "I hear you, Robert," I replied, maintaining the neutral tone, the same one I used to deal with lawyers who came looking for lost deeds. I heard a sigh on the other end. The sound of someone trying to work up their courage. Vanessa just called me from her car. She told me you were rude to her, that you refused to pack your things, and that you locked yourself in your room with an old wooden box. Mom, please, don't make this harder than it already is. I'm in the middle of month-end closing at the office. I don't have time to deal with your tantrums. My tantrums, I repeated, savoring the choice of word. Yes, your tantrums. I know it's hard to leave the house, but you have to be reasonable. Dr. Evans told me the last time he saw you that you're no longer in a condition to live alone. The stairs, the gas stove, the cleaning, it's a hazard. Sunset Manor costs a fortune, but Vanessa and I made the effort to pay for it up front because we want what's best for you. They have beautiful gardens. You'll have company. Vanessa informed me that you signed a broad power of attorney over the property, I said, completely ignoring his monologue about gardens and doctors. I went straight to the structural core of the problem. Robert coughed, clearly uncomfortable with my change of subject. Yeah, I did that last week. Vanessa found some incredible investors for her clothing brand. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, Mom, and she needs a large, centrally located space. The house was going to waste. You only used 2 rooms. It was the logical thing to do. I handed the management over to her so she could sign the remodeling contracts without having to bother me every 5 minutes. It's standard procedure. I gripped the receiver tighter. My son's ignorance was so vast, it was almost fascinating to observe in action. Did you read the contract Vanessa signed with Vance Investments, Robert? I asked, slipping the company's name in with the precision of a scalpel. There was a long silence on the line. What contract? Vanessa handles her own business affairs. I just gave her power over the property so she could use it as a base of operations. Mom, don't try to change the subject. Tomorrow at 9, the truck and the transport from the nursing home are arriving. I need you to have your bags ready by the door. I am not going to let you ruin my daughter's project over an attack of nostalgia. Don't worry about my bags, Robert. Tomorrow at 9, your daughter and I are going to have everything exactly where it belongs. I'm glad to hear that, he said, his voice relaxing instantly, assuming my answer was a total capitulation. I knew you'd come to your senses. I promise I'll come visit you at the manor on Sunday. I'll bring you those dark chocolates you like. Get some rest, Mom. Good night, Robert. I hung the phone back on its wall mount. The metallic click echoed in the empty kitchen. Robert had just confirmed what I suspected. He had no idea about the $100,000 penalty clause. He had signed a blind power of attorney, handing his daughter a loaded gun without checking if the safety was on. And Vanessa, in her arrogance, had pulled the trigger, aiming right at her own foot. I left the kitchen in the dark and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. Navigating around the boxes in the gloom required perfect muscle memory, the same kind that allowed me to navigate the subterranean aisles of the archive without turning on the lights. I reached my room and switched on the small nightstand lamp. On the bed, the hand-knit quilt was still wrinkled. In the center, like 3 monuments to disrespect, sat the black heavy-duty trash bags Vanessa had left for me to throw my life away in. I walked over to the bed, grabbed the first bag by the bottom, and shook it out. It was empty. I took the second and the third, folded them methodically into small squares, and put them away in the bottom drawer of my wardrobe. Then I sat on the edge of the mattress and ran my hand over the smooth wood of Thomas's cedar box, which rested safely on my pillow. The smell of old wood and wax transported me immediately to another memory, the second classified file detailing the true nature of this family. The year 2015. It had been barely 48 hours since we buried Thomas. The house was full of neighbors, half-empty coffee cups, and the respectful murmur of mourning. I was sitting in this very room with the door cracked open, unable to go out and face the condolences. Vanessa was 15 years old. She was wearing a black dress that seemed more appropriate for a party than a funeral, and she was pacing the living room with her phone in her hand. Through the crack in the door, I saw her walk up to the dining room table, the massive solid mahogany table Thomas had bought with his first big holiday bonus. Vanessa ran a hand over the polished wood, but there was no sadness in her gesture. There was no memory of the grandfather who taught her to play cards on that very surface. She looked up at her father, Robert, who was leaning against the window frame, eating a club sandwich. "Hey, Dad," Vanessa had said, her voice clear and devoid of any morning tone. "How much do you think we could get for this table at an antique shop? If we sell it, and sell the display cabinets, I'll easily have enough for the car I want when I turn 18. I mean, Grandma isn't going to host big dinners all by herself anymore. It's ridiculous for it to take up so much space. My widowhood wasn't a family tragedy, it was a real estate opportunity." Vanessa saw me as a temporary obstacle, just another piece of furniture taking up space in the house she already considered hers. Her lack of empathy wasn't a teenage flaw. It was a character structure her father had fed with his cowardice. I opened my eyes, bringing myself back to the present. The cedar box under my hands was cold. I stood up. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. An archivist's mind races when the deadline for a critical file approaches. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with freezing water, and began to prepare my armor. I pulled my navy blue two-piece suit from the closet. It was the exact same suit I wore the day I was named head of the Civil Registry section in 1990. The fabric, of impeccable quality, didn't have a single wrinkle. I ironed the white silk blouse with slow, precise movements, making sure the collars were perfectly stiff. I polished my low-heeled shoes, comfortable but formal, the ones that made a sharp, authoritative click when walking on the parquet floor. It was 4 in the morning when I finished getting dressed. I pinned the pearl brooch Thomas gave me for our silver anniversary right on the left lapel of the jacket. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. There was no fragility in my reflection. There was no disoriented old woman who needed supervision. There was a woman who knew the weight of the law and was about to drop that weight on the heads of those who tried to erase her. I went to the dining room. I turned on the main light, illuminating the manila envelope resting on the table next to my leather purse. The envelope contained the third memory, the heaviest of them all, the centerpiece of this chessboard. The year 2008. Arthur Sterling's office on the second floor of the real estate registry building. Outside, it was pouring rain. Thomas was sitting next to me, breathing heavily. 2 weeks earlier, he had been diagnosed with the pulmonary emphysema that would end up killing him 7 years later. Sterling was on the other side of his massive mahogany desk, glasses perched on the tip of his nose, reading the document he had just printed. Life estate. Sterling had read aloud, lowering the papers and looking my husband straight in the eye. "Thomas, old friend, are you absolutely sure about this? You are leaving Teresa with total dominion over the use and enjoyment of the property until the day she dies. But you are naming Robert as the heir to the bare legal title of your half. That means when you're gone, Robert will own the paper, but he won't be able to touch a single brick, sell, rent, or kick Teresa out as long as she breathes. Robert is going to hate this. He's going to feel like you handed him a safe without the combination. Robert thinks the world owes him something simply for existing," Thomas had replied. "If I leave the property to him free and clear, he'll mortgage it for his next failed business. Or worse, he'll convince Teresa to sell it to help him, and she'll end up on the street. This house is my wife's shield. Make that document bulletproof. If Robert wants the house, he'll have to wait for Teresa to close her eyes for good. And knowing my wife's strength, Robert will be an old man by the time that happens." And now, 16 years after that rainy afternoon, the shield was about to be put to the test. Robert had forgotten the existence of this document, or worse, in his infinite administrative laziness, he never bothered to check the encumbrance records before signing the power of attorney over to Vanessa. He assumed his father's death automatically made him king of the castle. I picked up the manila envelope. I checked one last time that the original deed and the life estate addendum were intact, and I tucked it into my black leather purse, securing the metal clasp. I looked at the kitchen wall clock, 5:30 in the morning. I brewed coffee. It's strong black coffee, the kind I drank on general inventory days at the archive. The aroma filled the kitchen, masking for a moment the smell of cardboard and glue from Vanessa's boxes. I sat in the chair with my back straight, the hot mug between my hands, and waited for the sun to begin to rise. At 7:15, the neighborhood began to wake up. I stood up and walked to the living room window, opening a small gap between the heavy velvet curtains. Maple Avenue was submerged in that thin, cold fog typical of early mornings. Moisture glistened on the asphalt. At 7:30, I saw the door of Charlie's garage open with a metallic screech that broke the silence of the block. The old mechanic walked out at a brisk pace, rubbing his hands against the cold. He went into his backyard, and 5 minutes later, the diesel engine of his tow truck coughed, spat black smoke, and roared to life. Charlie maneuvered the heavy, rusted vehicle out onto the street. He drove it at a snail's pace right up to the exact corner of my curb, the only possible angle where a large truck would have to maneuver to square up in front of my door. I saw Charlie cut the engine. He climbed down from the cab, walked to the front of the tow truck, popped the hood, and crouched down, pretending to check a critical failure. He placed 2 dirty orange cones around the vehicle. The physical trap was set. The tow truck perfectly blocked the turning radius. At 7:45, the door of the house with the green gates opened. Martha stepped out onto the sidewalk. She was wearing a thick wool coat and holding her aluminum cane. She didn't start sweeping. Instead, she unfolded a canvas lawn chair right on the edge of her porch. She sat down with a blanket over her legs and pulled out her cell phone. I saw her typing furiously with her thumbs. She was activating the network. In less than 10 minutes, the porch lights of the neighboring houses began to turn on one by one, like fireflies responding to an alarm signal. At 8 o'clock sharp, Elias the baker appeared, turning the corner. He was pushing a small metal cart on wheels, upon which he had set up a folding table, 2 giant stainless steel thermoses, a tower of thermal cups, and a tray covered in aluminum foil. He crossed the street, greeted Charlie with a nod, and set up his coffee station exactly on the edge of my front lawn, right next to my rose bushes. The neighborhood wasn't just watching, the neighborhood was taking tactical positions. At 8:15, a dark gray sedan, impeccably clean, parked behind Charlie's broken-down tow truck. The driver's door opened, and Arthur Sterling stepped out of the vehicle. He wore a black wool coat, a gray cashmere scarf, and in his right hand, his inseparable brown leather briefcase. His white hair was perfectly combed back. He walked toward my porch, looked at the lit porches of the neighboring houses, looked at Elias's coffee station, and offered an imperceptible smile. Sterling walked up my 3 steps and stopped in front of my door, waiting like the relentless notary he always was. At 8:20, I opened the front door. The freezing morning air hit my face, but I didn't shiver. Sterling looked me up and down, evaluating my navy blue suit, my upright posture, and the absolute lack of fear in my expression. "You look exactly like you did the day you locked down the Central Archive because the mayor tried to pull documents without authorization, Teresa," Sterling said, his gravelly voice echoing on the porch. "A fortress." "The invaders are on their way, Arthur," I replied, adjusting the strap of my purse over my shoulder. "Did you bring the certified copies?" Sterling patted his leather briefcase, page by page, with fresh stamps from the current registrar, just so they can't say the papers are old. "The life estate is as active as the sun that's coming up." I stepped up to the porch railing. Martha raised her hand to me from across the street in a sign of support. 3 more neighbors had already come out to their yards, pretending to water plants that didn't need water. With his eyes glued to my curb, Charlie still had his head buried under the hood of the tow truck. Elias poured the first cup of coffee for the mechanic. The stage was set, the audience was in their seats, the documents were on the table. At 8:45, the unmistakable sound of a heavy engine began to vibrate through the asphalt. It was a diesel roar, much more powerful than Charlie's tow truck. I looked toward the end of Maple Avenue, a massive moving truck, impeccably white, with the logo of a luxury transport company painted on its sides, turned slowly to enter the block. The vehicle moved forward, taking up almost the entire roadway. Behind it, practically glued to its rear bumper, came a red sports car. Vanessa's car. The moving truck reached the corner and tried to swing wide to maneuver and back up in front of my driveway, but Charlie's rusted tow truck was parked exactly in the blind spot of the turn. The truck driver honked his horn, a shrill sound that echoed off the facades of all the houses. Charlie, unfazed, pulled his head out from under the hood, wiped his hands with his dark rag, and gestured to the driver, indicating the engine was dead. The massive truck was left stuck diagonally, completely blocking traffic on Maple Avenue. The engine idled, a deep purr that rattled the glass in my windows. The door of the red sports car flew open. Vanessa stepped out of the car. She was wearing tight leather pants, high boots, and a designer coat that fluttered in the morning breeze. In one hand, she held a cardboard coffee cup from an international chain. In the other, her cell phone. Her face was a mask of supreme irritation. She slammed her car door shut, marched down the sidewalk navigating around the blocked truck, and looked up at my house. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw it. She saw Charlie and his tow truck. She saw Elias handing out coffee. She saw Martha and the dozen neighbors who were now standing on the sidewalks, watching her in absolute deadly silence. And finally, her eyes traveled up the 3 steps of my porch. She saw me, dressed in my head archivist suit, standing next to Arthur Sterling and his leather briefcase. Vanessa lowered her coffee cup. The arrogant smile she had arrived with began to fade at the corners of her lips. I took a step forward, resting my hand on the cold iron railing, ready to begin the most important audit of my life. The sound of the moving truck's diesel engine vibrated in the freezing morning air, a heavy, rhythmic percussion that seemed to set the heartbeat of Maple Avenue. It was an enormous vehicle, impeccably white, with the logo of a luxury transport company painted in blue letters along its metallic flanks. Its size was completely disproportionate to our narrow residential street, designed in the 60s for small cars and family station wagons. The driver, a stocky man in a reflective vest, was trying to maneuver the steel giant to back up and align the loading ramp exactly in front of my wrought iron gate. However, Charlie's rusted tow truck, parked at the most critical angle of the corner, turned the operation into a geometric impossibility. The truck was left stuck diagonally, blocking both directions of traffic, letting out a hiss of air brakes that echoed against the facades of the neighboring houses. Behind the truck, barely showing its aerodynamic hood, sat Vanessa's red sports car. The driver's door swung open with a violent push, nearly hitting the truck's rear bumper. My granddaughter stepped out of the vehicle, and her mere presence looked like a filing error in the context of our retirement neighborhood. She wore tight black leather pants, stiletto boots that clicked against the uneven asphalt, and a camel-colored designer coat that fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. In her left hand, she held a cardboard coffee cup from an expensive international chain. In her right, her latest generation cell phone, its screen glowing endlessly. Her face, made up with that artificial perfection young people call natural, was a mask of supreme irritation. She was used to the world stepping out of her way with just a snap of her fingers, and she couldn't fathom a 30-year-old tow truck interrupting her itinerary of success. Vanessa slammed her car door shut with an echo that rang down the block. She marched with quick strides down the sidewalk, dodging the white mass of the blocked truck, and headed straight for the cab of the tow truck. She didn't look around. She didn't notice Martha sitting in her canvas chair, nor the other neighbors peeking through their fences. Her vision was a tunnel focused solely on the obstacle. "Hey," Vanessa yelled, addressing the front of the tow truck where Charlie had half his body buried under the popped hood. "Hey you, I need you to move this piece of junk immediately. My moving truck has to park here. I'm on a very tight schedule, and I can't waste time with this." Charlie emerged slowly from the engine compartment. He was wearing a worn-out wool beanie and holding a crescent wrench stained with black grease. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and looked at my granddaughter with an expression of absolute, unshakable blue-collar patience. "Good morning, miss," Charlie said, drawing out his words with deliberate slowness, savoring every syllable. "I'd love to help you. Believe me, I would. But this poor machine just suffered a massive mechanical heart attack. Injector problem, I reckon, or maybe the fuel pump. It won't start even by a miracle." "I don't care about your mechanical problems," Vanessa fired back, raising her voice another notch, her sharp tone cutting through the morning cold. "Move the vehicle by pushing it if you have to, or I'll call traffic control and a city tow truck to haul this garbage to the impound lot. You are blocking a public road." Charlie let out a gravelly laugh, a harsh sound that would scrape anyone's throat, but which came naturally to a man who had smoked dark tobacco his whole life. He rested the wrench on the rusted bumper and crossed his arms. "Call the cops, miss. Call the fire department if you want." The cops can stick a ticket on the windshield, but they aren't mechanics. And a city tow truck takes, with luck, about 4 hours to get to this side of town. In the meantime, this 3-ton hunk of metal isn't moving an inch. But if you want, Elias over there has hot coffee. It's too cold to be yelling so early. Vanessa whipped her head around to where Charlie was pointing. For the first time, her eyes registered her surroundings. She saw Elias standing behind his small folding table, pouring steaming coffee into thermal cups. She saw Charlie take one of the cups with a grateful smile. Then, her gaze swept the street. She saw Martha holding her phone up, recording the scene with the precision of a documentary filmmaker. She saw Mrs. Rose, Mr. Albert, the retired teacher from the corner house. More than a dozen people were standing on their porches, on the sidewalks, leaning on their fences, watching her in a deathly, absolute, and accusing silence. Nobody whispered, nobody looked away. The entire neighborhood was cataloging her. The moving truck driver, tired of waiting, cut his engine, climbed down from his cab with a plastic clipboard in his hand, and walked over to Vanessa. "Miss, we have a problem," the man said, tapping a pen against the clipboard. "I can't leave the truck stuck sideways in the street. If a patrol car comes by, I get the ticket. Plus, my guys charge by the hour from the minute we leave the depot. If we can't park and start loading the furniture, I'm going to have to charge you for the standby time, and it's not cheap. Nobody is going to charge anyone extra." Vanessa exploded, completely losing her fashion designer composure, her voice cracking from frustration. "Park wherever you can. On the corner, on the next block. I don't care. Have your men walk over and start hauling things out. I'm going to fix this." She spun around, turning her back to the driver and Charlie, and finally looked up at my house. Her eyes scanned the front lawn, traveled up the 3 concrete steps, and stopped dead. There I was, standing in the center of my porch in my navy blue 2-piece suit, white silk blouse buttoned to the collar, and my low-heeled shoes firmly planted on the tiles Thomas and I picked out in 1978. On my right side, immovable as a marble column, stood Arthur Sterling, holding his brown leather briefcase with both hands in front of his black wool coat. The arrogance on Vanessa's face wavered for a fraction of a second, replaced by genuine confusion, but her pride was too deeply ingrained a defense mechanism to let her back down. She squeezed her coffee cup so hard the plastic lid threatened to pop off, and began walking toward my property. Her boots echoed against the walkway tiles. She climbed the 3 porch steps without asking permission, stopping 3 feet away from us. "Grandma, what is this circus?" she asked, trying to recover her tone of condescending authority, the same one she had used the day before to tell me I needed supervision. "Did you organize this? Did you pay that old mechanic to block the street? I told you clearly that the transport from Sunset Manor arrives in 15 minutes. You should be inside with your bags ready by the door, not out here putting on a show for your gossipy neighbors." I looked her in the eye. In the archive, I've seen hundreds of people try to hide their fear behind aggression. I've seen corrupt lawyers yell when they discover a key document has vanished from their folders. Vanessa was no different. She was a defective file, full of miscalculations, trying to validate itself through sheer volume. I didn't answer her. I kept my lips sealed and my expression neutral. The silence, as always, made the void in the conversation unbearable for her. Vanessa shifted her gaze to the man beside me. She sighed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh, right, Arthur Sterling, the family lawyer. How sweet that you came to say goodbye to my grandmother," she said, using the attorney's first name with disrespectful familiarity. "I guess you're here for moral support. It's a nice gesture, Arthur, but completely unnecessary. My dad already sorted out all the legal paperwork. He is the rightful owner of this property and has handed complete management over to me. So please, help her inside and get her coat on. I don't have time to deal with anyone's nostalgia today. I have a demo crew waiting for confirmation to come in on Friday." Sterling didn't alter his posture, didn't frown, didn't show indignation. He simply offered a very faint, cold, professional smile. The smile of an executioner who knows the guillotine has already been oiled and tested. "I didn't come to say goodbye to your grandmother, Vanessa," Sterling said, his deep, gravelly voice projecting with astonishing clarity in the morning air. I came to work, and I suggest you watch your tone when addressing the sole legal owner of the use rights to this house." Vanessa let out a dry laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "Legal owner, Arthur, please. My grandfather Thomas passed away years ago. The succession was completed. My dad inherited this house. I saw the probate papers myself. He signed a broad power of attorney in my favor last week. It's all filed with the notary. You two are just a couple of old folks trying to cling to a past that doesn't exist anymore. The paper is signed. The house belongs to my dad, and by extension, it's mine to manage." Sterling nodded slowly, like a professor listening to a student repeat a fundamentally flawed concept before failing them in front of the entire class. With deliberate, measured movements, he lifted his brown leather briefcase. He rested it on the wrought iron porch railing and popped the two metal latches. The double click echoed in the quiet street, so loud that I saw Martha lean forward in her chair so as not to miss a single detail. Sterling pulled a thick cardboard folder tied with a red official ribbon from inside the briefcase. He untied the knot, opened the folder, and pulled out a stack of documents printed on heavy cardstock. The watermarks from the real estate registry gleamed under the pale light of the rising sun. The blue ink signatures and notary stamps were fresh and crisp. The problem with younger generations, Vanessa, is that they confuse the speed of a signature with the depth of the law, Sterling began, separating the first document and holding it up in front of her. "Your father, Robert, did indeed inherit the property upon Thomas's death, but he inherited what is known in civil law exclusively as the bare legal title." Vanessa furrowed her brow, her eyes darting over the printed letters Sterling was showing her, trying to decipher the technical jargon. Bare legal title. That means he's the owner. "It's the same thing," she shot back, though her voice had lost a fraction of its certainty. "No, it is not the same thing," Sterling corrected her, with the relentless patience of a surgeon operating without anesthesia. Full ownership is divided into two fundamental rights: the bare legal title, which is the title to the bricks and the land, and the life estate, which is the absolute right to use, enjoy, and occupy the property. Thomas, knowing perfectly well your father's financial immaturity, asked me to draft this clause in 2008. Sterling turned to the second page, pointing with his index finger to a highlighted paragraph. "Read the fine print, Vanessa, or better yet, I'll read it to you, since you seem to be in a hurry. An irrevocable and exclusive life estate is hereby established in favor of Teresa over the entirety of the property located on Maple Avenue. The bare title holder, Robert, shall not, under any circumstances, sell, lease, structurally modify, or demand the eviction of the life tenant, with Teresa retaining absolute dominion over the use of the property until the day of her passing." That has to have expired. My dad signed a broad power of attorney, a notarized power of attorney, Arthur. A notary validated it last week. I have the document in my purse. A notary validates that your father's signature is authentic. Vanessa, not that your father has the power to do what he promises, Sterling explained, closing the folder with a sharp movement. Your father granted you broad power over a right he does not possess. He cannot hand over the management of this house because he does not manage it. Teresa does. Your father handed you an empty safe, and you, in your arrogance, didn't even bother to check if he had the combination before you started spending the money you thought was inside. The power of attorney you have in your purse isn't worth the cost of the ink it was printed with. Liar! Vanessa screamed, losing her temper, the word escaping her lips with the rawness of a spoiled child who just had a toy taken away. You're making this up. My dad checked everything. My dad told me the house was free and clear. I'm calling him right now. You guys are frauds. Vanessa slammed her coffee cup down on the porch railing, a clumsy gesture that sent dark droplets splashing onto the freshly painted iron. She pulled out her cell phone with trembling hands. Her long, manicured fingers tapped the screen in desperation. She turned on the speakerphone and held the device out in front of us, as if the object itself were a protective shield. The ringtone echoed on the porch. 1, 2, 3. "Hello?" Robert's voice sounded metallic and rushed through the speaker. In the background, you could hear the noise of keyboards and phones from his office. "Val, I'm about to walk into a management meeting. Did they load the truck yet? Did you have any problems with Grandma? I told you, if she gets stubborn, just call the paramedics from the nursing home. They know how to handle disoriented seniors." The murmuring of the neighbors in the street stopped completely. My son's voice, suggesting they treat me like a psychiatric patient to facilitate his real estate fraud, floated in the freezing air, naked and pathetic. Charlie clenched his jaw, and Martha covered her mouth with her hand. "Dad, listen to me," Vanessa shrieked, ignoring her surroundings, her eyes wide and fixed on Sterling. "Grandma's lawyer is here, Arthur Sterling. He has a paper that says Grandma has a life estate, that you only have bare legal title, and that you can't kick her out or remodel the house. Tell me that was voided in probate. Tell me the power of attorney you signed for me is valid." There was absolute silence on the other end of the line. The background noise of Robert's office seemed to vanish. All you could hear was his heavy, suddenly ragged breathing, like a man who had just stepped out into thin air. "Dad?" Vanessa insisted, her voice trembling for the first time. "Dad, can you hear me? The notary told you that you were the sole owner, right?" The notary told me I inherited the title to my dad's half," Robert stammered, his voice shrinking until it became a pathetic whisper. I thought that when he died, the house passed entirely into my name. I never checked the addendums at the registry." "Val, you told me you needed the paperwork done fast to sign with the contractors. I just signed what your lawyer sent me." Sterling leaned toward the phone Vanessa was holding. "I warned you in 2008, Robert," the lawyer said, his tone relentless. "I told you we were handing you a safe without the combination. You assumed Thomas's death erased the protections he himself built against your incompetence. You signed a fraudulent power of attorney, Robert. You tried to dispose of an asset that is legally shielded by your mother's right of use." "Dad!" Vanessa screamed, tears of panic finally welling in her eyes, destroying her perfect makeup. "You already told me you were the owner. I signed a contract based on your property title. I have financial commitments that start this Friday." "Val, Karen, I didn't know. I thought Grandma would just go quietly to the nursing home and nobody would ask any questions." Robert's voice was a whimper of cowardice. He realized the magnitude of his mistake and resorted to his oldest tactic, running away. "I'm going to call my lawyer. I'm going to see how we fix this. Don't do anything yet." The sound of the dropped call, 3 flat, monotonous beeps, was the only answer Vanessa received. Her father had abandoned her, leaving her alone, facing the structural collapse of her lies. Vanessa slowly lowered the phone. Her face was pale, drained of all the blood and arrogance that had propelled her up to this moment. She looked at me. She no longer saw the fragile old woman who needed supervision. She saw the concrete wall she had just crashed her life into at 120 miles an hour. I took a step forward. The click of my heels on the porch made Vanessa flinch. It was my turn to conduct the final audit. "Yesterday afternoon you walked into my house without knocking," I began, my voice low, level, cutting the air with the precision of a scalpel. "You filled the hallways my husband built with cardboard boxes. You went into my bedroom. You opened my closets and put trash bags on my bed so I could throw my own history away. You told me this house was too big for me. You told me you needed this space and that I needed medical supervision because, according to you, old people forget things." Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She was hyperventilating, but in the archives, Vanessa, nobody forgets anything. Everything gets logged, everything gets read, even the documents you leave carelessly on the dining room table while you go to the kitchen to plan the destruction of my walls. Vanessa's eyes widened massively. The memory of her clear plastic folder hit her physically. She took a step back, bumping into the iron railing. Her elbow knocked over the coffee cup she had left there, sending it tumbling. The dark, hot liquid spilled over the iron and fell directly onto the toe of her expensive designer boots, staining the pristine leather. She didn't even look down. "The investment contract and commercial partnership agreement," I recited from memory, pronouncing every word with the clarity of someone reading a death sentence. "Signed by you and Vance Investments." An initial capital injection of $50,000 for the machinery and inventory of your clothing brand. You put up this property, which doesn't belong to you, as collateral and headquarters. Vanessa brought her hands to her head, her fingers tangling in her perfectly flat-ironed hair. No, 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 she muttered, shaking her head repeatedly, as if her words could reverse time. But what really caught my attention as an archivist, I continued, taking another step toward her, backing her against the railing, was the penalty clause in the third paragraph. That little fine print you young people never read. In the event that the receiving party fails to deliver physical and unencumbered possession of the property before Friday of the current week, the contract will be nullified, and she must return the capital in full, plus a penalty for damages equivalent to 100% of the contributed amount. I felt the absolute warmth of justice executed with precision. $100,000, Vanessa, I said, my voice dropping like a steel hammer on an anvil. You gambled $50,000 you don't have, using a house you can't touch, backed by a father who doesn't know what he's signing. And today is Wednesday. You have 48 hours to hand Vance Investments a design studio that is never going to exist. Vanessa let out a choked sob. Her knees seemed to give out, and she had to grip the coffee-stained railing to keep from collapsing onto my porch floor. Her entire facade of a successful businesswoman had crumbled in under 10 minutes, exposing a scared little girl who had just signed her own financial ruin. At that moment, the moving truck driver, who had been watching the scene from the sidewalk with his arms crossed, stepped onto the first porch step. His patience was completely gone. "Miss," the man said, tapping his pen against his clipboard again. "I don't know what kind of legal problem you've got going on here, but I'm not getting involved in a property dispute. If you don't have the keys and the permission to empty this house, we are leaving, and I'm charging you the last-minute cancellation fee. It's $500. I need your credit card right now, or I'm calling the police to report fraudulent service." Vanessa turned her head toward the man, her face bathed in tears of public humiliation. The neighbors in the street were no longer silent. A low, steady murmur rippled down the block, the sound of 40 years of community loyalty celebrating the fall of the invader. Martha was still recording, making sure every second of this defeat was archived in the neighborhood's digital memory. Before Vanessa could stammer a reply to the truck driver, a new vehicle rounded the corner, barely squeezing past Charlie's tow truck and the blocked semi. It was a gleaming white high-roof van, with gold lettering painted on the side that read, "Sunset Manor. Your well-being is our priority." The rear doors swung open, and two orderlies stepped out quickly. They wore spotless light blue medical scrubs. One of them unfolded a wheelchair onto the sidewalk, while the other, a young woman holding a clipboard, walked straight toward my porch with a standardized, professional smile. "Good morning," the nurse announced loudly, her enthusiasm violently clashing against the devastated atmosphere of the scene. "We're here from Sunset Manor to pick up Teresa. We have her room ready and the welcome menu prepared. Who is the relative in charge? We were informed the patient might be a bit disoriented and would need supervision during transport." Sterling let out a low chuckle and tucked his documents back into his briefcase. I kept my posture straight, slowly turned my head toward the nurse, and gave her a polite smile. "I am Teresa," I said with a firm, serene voice, "and I appreciate your punctuality very much. However, there has been a filing error. I do not need medical supervision or transport. I am perfectly capable of managing my own property." The nurse blinked in confusion, taking in my immaculate suit and my absolute lack of disorientation. She looked at her clipboard, and then looked at Vanessa, who was still clinging to the railing, crying silently with her coffee-stained boots. "The person who paid for the 6 months in advance is my granddaughter, Vanessa," I continued, pointing to her with a gentle wave of my hand. "And I believe she is the one you need to speak with. I'm afraid she's going to need you to cancel the contract and process an urgent refund. She is experiencing a catastrophic financial crisis, and frankly, I think she's the one who needs supervision right now. Although I highly doubt the nursing home refund will be enough to cover the $100,000 she owes her investors." The nurse looked at Vanessa, then at the truck driver demanding his payment, and finally at the crowd of neighbors watching from the street. The situation was way above any nursing home protocol. Vanessa's cell phone, still clutched in her trembling hand, began to vibrate and ring with a shrill melody. The screen lit up, projecting a name in large letters that I could read clearly from where I stood. Marcus Vance, investor. I adjusted the pearl brooch on the lapel of my jacket, feeling the crisp morning air clear away the smell of cardboard and glue that had infected my home. The audit was complete, the damage was cataloged, and the debt was finally about to be collected. Vanessa's cell phone vibrated in her hand with the fury of a trapped insect, emitting a sharp buzz that cut through the cold morning air. The screen flashed relentlessly, illuminating the name Marcus Vance in large, threatening letters. My granddaughter stood paralyzed, staring at the device as if she were suddenly holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. Her breathing became erratic, shallow, her chest rising and falling beneath her designer coat, as panic stripped away any remaining trace of the arrogance she had arrived with. I didn't move. I kept my hands folded at my waist, observing the scene with the same clinical precision I used when reviewing eminent domain files at the municipal archive. When a building is constructed on a false foundation, the collapse isn't a tragedy, it's simply the inevitable correction of a structural error. The phone stopped ringing for a second, only to restart its shrill melody almost immediately. Vance wasn't a man who took silence for an answer. With trembling fingers, knowing that everyone present on Maple Avenue had their eyes glued to her, Vanessa swiped her thumb across the green screen. She brought the device to her ear, but her hand was shaking so badly she had to hold it with both hands. "Marcus," she stammered, her voice barely a brittle thread, far removed from the young businesswoman barking orders about drywall and windows. I didn't need to step closer to hear the investor's voice. The silence on my porch was so absolute that Vance's words, filtered through the earpiece, echoed with brutal clarity. "Vanessa, my assistant just went down to the city hall to check the building permits for the Maple Avenue remodel," the man said. His tone was stripped of any courtesy, heavy and direct. "She informs me that there is no application filed under your name, your father's name, or my company's name. And what's worse, the property registry indicates that the building has an active life estate on it. Can you explain to me what the hell this means? My contractors go in on Friday, and I need the keys today." Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut. A pair of black, mascara-stained tears slid down her pale cheeks. "Marcus, please, listen to me. There was a small legal misunderstanding with my grandfather's estate," she tried to articulate, desperately trying to buy time. "An impossible extension. My dad is sorting it out with the lawyers. I swear the house will be clear. I just need a few more days. A couple of weeks maybe. We can push back the start of construction. I'll cover the cost of the crew." "Push back." Vance's laugh was short, harsh, and completely devoid of humor. "You signed a collateral agreement, Vanessa. You assured me you had free and clear possession of the property. You had me wire $50,000 to your supposed brand's account based on a fraud. That's not a legal misunderstanding. That's a scam. And I don't do business with scammers." "It's not a scam. The money is untouched in the account. I'll send it back right now," she screamed, desperation breaking her voice completely. "The contract stipulates a 100% penalty for breach of contract and damages, Vanessa. $100,000. You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. to deposit that exact amount into the Vance Investments account. If the money isn't there, my lawyers will file criminal charges for procedural fraud and embezzlement, and I'll request an immediate freeze on all your accounts and your father's. Do not call me again unless it's to send me the wire confirmation." The call disconnected with a sharp, definitive click. Vanessa's arm dropped heavily to her side. The phone slipped from her lifeless fingers and hit the tiles of my porch, the screen shattering into a dozen glowing spiderwebs. She made no attempt to pick it up. She just stared blankly into space, her wide eyes reflecting the financial abyss she had just plummeted into through her own arrogance. The moving truck driver, who had witnessed the entire conversation with his hands on his hips, didn't show an ounce of pity. In his world, time was money, and Vanessa had already wasted too much of both. He took another step forward, invading my granddaughter's personal space, and held up his plastic clipboard. "$100,000 or not, miss, you owe me for my time," the man said, pulling a wireless payment terminal from his pocket. $500 for the gate cancellation and tying up the truck. And I want it right now, or I call my boss to send out traffic control. Vanessa blinked, shaking her head as if snapping out of a trance. She opened her designer leather bag with clumsy, almost robotic movements. She pulled out a thick wallet and extracted a gold credit card. She handed it to the driver without looking him in the face. The man inserted the card into the machine, punched in the amount, and waited. Seconds later, the device let out a low beep, and a message in red letters lit up the small screen. Declined, the driver announced, handing the plastic back with a gesture of disdain. Your bank didn't authorize the charge. Got another one? Or do I call the patrol? Vanessa's face fell even further, if that was even possible. Her father, in a blind panic after the previous call, had surely already started freezing their shared credit lines to protect whatever little he had left. She rummaged through her wallet, pulled out a worn blue debit card, the one she used back in college, and handed it to the man. The driver swiped the magnetic strip. This time the machine processed the payment, printing a paper receipt that the man tore off with a yank. Thanks, the driver muttered. Then he turned to me and touched the brim of his cap in a gesture of respect. Sorry for the trouble, ma'am. Have a good day. The man walked down the porch steps and headed toward his massive white truck. But Vanessa's humiliation wasn't over yet. The nurse from Sunset Manor, who had been watching the debacle with wide eyes, approached cautiously. She no longer had that standardized smile. Now she just wanted to close her file and get off Maple Avenue as quickly as possible. Miss Vanessa, the nurse said, holding out the clipboard and a plastic pen. Since the patient does not require our services and is refusing transport, I need you to sign this voluntary discharge and cancellation form. Vanessa took the pen with a hand that was shaking uncontrollably. The money I paid for the 6 months, my granddaughter babbled, her mind clinging to any life preserver in the middle of the shipwreck. I need it refunded. Today. To the same account I wired it from. The nurse shifted her posture, adopting the bureaucratic tone of someone who has delivered bad news hundreds of times. As I explained on the phone when you made the reservation, miss, cancellations with less than 72 hours notice carry a 20% retention fee for administrative costs and room blocking. The remaining 80% will be processed within 15 to 20 business days, subject to approval by the finance department. It's all detailed in Clause 4 of the contract you signed. Sign right down here, please. The coup de grace, the irony of the fine print. The exact same fine print Vanessa had ignored at the real estate registry, the exact same fine print she had ignored in Vance's contract. Now it came back to bite her for a third time in under half an hour, 15 business days. By then, Vance's lawsuit would be in the courts, and her accounts would be frozen solid. Vanessa scribbled an illegible scrawl on the paper and handed the clipboard back to the nurse, who nodded quickly, turned on her heel, and walked briskly back to her white van. Silence fell over the porch once again. Arthur Sterling closed the latches on his leather briefcase with a double metallic click, a sound that marked the official end of the audit. He looked at me out of the corner of his eye, gave a slight nod, and walked down the steps toward his gray sedan without saying another word. His job was done. I was left alone with Vanessa. She was still leaning against the railing, the dried coffee stain darkening the leather of her boot, her breathing reduced to silent sobs. There was no pity in my chest. For decades I had invested my time, my money, and my care into this girl and her father, and their only response was to try and pack me into cardboard boxes like I was trash. Justice isn't always a loud act of revenge. Sometimes it's simply allowing the weight of reality to crush those who think they are above it. I turned around and opened my front door. The smell of cardboard and glue hit me immediately. Vanessa's boxes were still there, choking my hallway, desecrating my space, a physical reminder of her insolence. I turned slowly and looked at her over my shoulder. You have exactly 10 minutes to get your trash out of my house, Vanessa, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. If at 9:15 there is a single one of your boxes left inside my property, I will authorize the neighbors to burn them in the middle of the street. I went inside and left the door wide open. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and sat in the dining room chair, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. I heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming up the porch, but they weren't Vanessa's heels. They were work boots, sneakers, and the metallic clinking of Martha's cane. I peeked into the hallway. Charlie the mechanic was standing in the doorway, accompanied by Elias and two of Martha's sons, strapping boys who always greeted me with respect when they came home from college. Outside on the porch, Vanessa watched the scene completely paralyzed, unable to issue an order, unable to defend her supposed territory. "With your permission, Miss Teresa," Charlie said, taking off his grease-stained cap for a second before putting it back on. "We figured at your age you shouldn't be doing any heavy lifting. We'll handle the cleanup." I nodded my head. What followed was the methodical, swift, and humiliating demolition of Vanessa's cardboard empire. The men of the neighborhood walked into my house and began lifting the heavy boxes labeled with linen fabrics and color swatches. They didn't treat them with the care the labels demanded. They hoisted them up and hauled them out to the street, stacking them directly on the dirty sidewalk next to my granddaughter's red sports car. The sound of boxes scraping against the walls disappeared. The hallway began to clear. Martha walked in behind the men, went straight to my bedroom, and 5 minutes later dragged out the 3 black trash bags Vanessa had left on my bed. Martha tossed them onto the porch with a gesture of deep disgust, right at Vanessa's feet. "So you can pack up your dignity, girl, if you ever had any," Martha spat, leaning on her cane. In under 10 minutes, my house breathed again. Natural light flowed from the back window to the front door without obstruction. The smell of industrial glue began to dissipate, replaced by the crisp morning breeze and the aroma of Elias's coffee drifting in from the street. Charlie and the boys walked out for the last time. The mechanic went down the steps, walked over to his rusted tow truck, climbed into the cab, and magically, the diesel engine started on the first try. Charlie shifted gears and pulled the tow truck away from the corner, clearing the blockade. The driver of the massive white moving truck, who had been waiting and smoking a cigarette, crushed the butt against the asphalt, climbed into his rig, and started the engine. The truck backed up with a warning beep, swung heavily around, and drove off down Maple Avenue, taking the threat of eviction with it. Seconds later, the Sunset Manor van followed the same path, vanishing from our ecosystem. Vanessa was left alone on the curb. She was surrounded by 40 boxes stacked haphazardly on the cold concrete. Her sports car didn't even have the capacity for a quarter of that volume. The neighbors, from their yards and windows, watched her in a deathly silence. Nobody insulted her, nobody yelled at her. The punishment was absolute indifference, total exclusion from the support network she had looked down upon. I walked to the threshold of my door. Vanessa looked up, her red, swollen eyes meeting mine. There was no defiance left, only the absolute recognition of her own insignificance in the face of the fortress of my archives. I closed the front door, slid the deadbolt, turned the key twice, and listened to the metallic click that sealed my dominion over the space. I didn't look out the window again. I didn't care how long it would take her to shove her misery into that little car, or who she'd have to beg to help her haul the rest away. My house was clean, and the cataloging of this threat had concluded. 6 months in which silence and peace had returned to my home, consolidating the structure of my life with the same firmness with which Arthur Sterling had drafted the life estate clause. It was Thursday afternoon. I had brewed a porcelain teapot of lemon verbena and set it on the mahogany dining table next to a plate of butter cookies Elias had sent over that very morning. The house was warm. The heating system worked perfectly, thanks to the repairs Charlie had done in exchange for me organizing the commercial license paperwork for his shop. The doorbell rang at 4 o'clock sharp. I went to answer it. Arthur Sterling was on the porch, wrapped in his black coat, holding his eternal leather briefcase. "Come in, Arthur. The tea is ready," I said, stepping aside to let him pass. Sterling walked in, hung his coat on the oak rack in the hallway, and headed for the dining room with the familiarity of old times. He sat in the chair across from me, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a small, thin gray folder, very different from the voluminous file he had brought 6 months ago. "I didn't come to collect a fee, Teresa. Don't worry," Sterling joked, taking a cookie and taking a small bite. "But I figured your archivist mind would like to have the official closure of this file. The judicial resolutions were published yesterday in the official Gazette." I poured the tea into the 2 cups, watching the steam spiral toward the ceiling. "I'm listening, Arthur. Incomplete data ruins any archive." Sterling set the cookie down on the plate, instantly adopting his professional posture, adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose. Vance Investments didn't mess around. The day after the incident, they filed the lawsuit for fraud and breach of contract. Vanessa, in a desperate attempt to avoid jail time, turned to Robert. "Your son, who has always been a coward but never a criminal, realized that the power of attorney he himself signed made him a necessary accomplice to the fraud. If Vanessa went down, he went down with her." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of tea. The legal logic was flawless. To pay the $100,000 penalty and the defense attorney's fees, Robert had to liquidate absolutely everything, Sterling continued, reading the excerpts from the gray folder. "The bank foreclosed on his downtown apartment because he stopped making payments. He had to sell his SUV and empty his retirement funds. They managed to reach an out-of-court settlement with Vance to drop the criminal charges, but they were left in absolute ruin." "Where are they now?" I asked. I felt neither pity nor joy. I felt the same neutrality with which I used to log the expiration date on an old record. Robert is renting a small room in a boarding house on the south side of the city. He works doing admin for some low-end auto parts shop, trying to pay off the loan shark debts he took on to cover the remaining balance. "He's aged, Teresa. I saw him walking out of the courthouse last week, and he looked 10 years older." Sterling paused, stirring his tea with the silver spoon, the clinking filling the silence of the dining room. "And Vanessa?" I inquired, remembering the coffee-stained boots and the designer coat. "The clothing brand was liquidated to pay back taxes. There is no design studio anymore, no big windows with northern light, no meetings with suppliers. She works at a strip mall out in the suburbs, at a discount clothing store. She stands on her feet 8 hours a day, folding t-shirts and arranging hangers for minimum wage. I'm told her arrogant attitude has already gotten her fired twice in these 6 months, and that she lives in a constant state of bitterness. They tried to evict you from your house to build an empire on your memory, and they ended up exiled to the darkest, smallest corners of the city." Sterling closed the gray folder and slid it gently across the table toward me. "It's yours, for your archives." I took the folder. The cardboard felt cold. Inside, the copies of the liens and liquidations detailed, number by number, the exact cost of underestimating a woman who spent 40 years organizing the chaos of the world. Robert and Vanessa tried to use bureaucracy as a blunt weapon against me, but they forgot that I was an architect of that very system. They had handed me back my peace of mind using the exact same mechanism they employed to try and destroy it. Sterling finished his tea. We talked a while longer about joint pain and the weather, and finally he said his goodbyes. I walked him to the door. Outside, Martha was sweeping the sidewalk, and upon seeing us, she raised her hand in a warm wave. Sterling got into his car and drove off. I closed the door. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a familiar hug. I walked down the clear hallway, running my hand over the intact wallpaper, feeling the solidity of the walls Vanessa had dreamed of tearing down. I reached my bedroom and turned on the small nightstand lamp. I sat on the edge of the bed, on top of the hand-knit quilt. I reached out and picked up the cedar box, resting on my nightstand. The wood, polished by the years and by touch, was warm. I opened the lid carefully. The smell of old tobacco and preserved paper flooded my senses. Inside were Thomas's letters, his medals, and the thick manila envelope with the original life estate document. I took the gray folder Sterling had just given me. I folded it meticulously in half, making sure the edges lined up perfectly, and placed it at the bottom of the box, beneath my husband's memories. Then I pulled out my green hardcover notebook, found a black ink pen in the drawer, and opened the notebook to the last blank page. With my rounded, firm, precise handwriting, the same handwriting that had filled thousands of folios in the municipal archive, I wrote today's date. Beneath it, I drew a single line, closed the notebook, and stored it next to the documents. I lowered the lid of the cedar box until I heard the soft friction of the wood sliding into place. I turned off the lamp, stood up, and walked over to the living room window, watching the evening slowly fall over Maple Avenue, knowing that tomorrow at 8 o'clock sharp, I would go out again with my coat buttoned up to buy bread in a world that remained exactly under my control.